is time for another new author highlights video. Today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite fantasy authors, and that is Michael J Sullivan. So stay tuned to learn a little bit more about one of my favorite fantasy authors. Hello everyone, it is Samantha, and I hope you guys are having a fabulous day. I'm here today, as I said in the intro, to do a new author highlights video. Today I'm going to be doing it on that wonderful fantasy author, Michael J Sullivan, the author of the Riyria Revelations and Chronicles. I am here today to tell you guys a little bit more about the books, why I enjoy them, where to start, and things of that nature. So let us get started. So Michael J Sullivan is the author of an epic fantasy series that is the Riyria Revelations series. The first book is Death of Swords. So Death of Swords follows our main characters, Rose and Hadrian. Rose and Hadrian are the two thieves that make up the organization of Riyria. Together, they take on a lot of hard tasks and seemingly impossible tasks on behalf of the nobility, such as stealing letters and delivering them to another nobleman, or bribing other noblemen, etc. Just any tasks that the noblemen used against each other, and they do so for money. So one day, Royce and Hadrian are approached by somebody with a job that they really cannot refuse. They are tasked with stealing a sword out of the king's chapel, and they are offered a large sum of money to do so. So Royce and Hadrian take on the job, Royce a little bit begrudgingly, and so they travel to the palace and they enter into the king's chapel, but instead of finding the sword, they find the dead king. They are found out and they are accused of murdering the king and are put into the dungeons. But then things become a little bit more weird because they are rescued out of the dungeons by the king's daughter, who knows that they did not commit the murder, and she is afraid that the next target is going to be her brother. So she tasks them with kidnapping her brother and having them travel to a secret prison to meet the wizard Esarhaddon. So a lot starts out in this book. Adventure kind of kicks off pretty much right away, and the story kind of takes off from there. There's a lot of political intrigue, a lot of tension between the crown and the Church of Novron, and Rose and Hadrian are caught into the middle of all of this politics, and it is fantastic. These were originally published as individual books, and then they were bound up into 2 books per volume. So Theft of Swords includes The Crown Conspiracy and Avampartha. Volume 2 is Rise of Empire, and includes Nifron Rising and Emerald Storm. And the third and final volume is my favorite, and it is the Heir of Novron, and this one includes Wintertide and Precipicus. So together these 3 volumes make up the stories of Riyria Revelations. I absolutely love this series. It's really, really easy and accessible fantasy, so if you're just starting into the world of fantasy, I think this is a perfect place to start. He really delves into a lot of the typical fantasy tropes, but he takes his own twist on them and makes them really original and entertaining. The characters of Royce and Hadrian are fantastic. They have one of the best romances I have ever read. It's just, I love their relationship, and they're so funny. Royce is incredibly sarcastic, and Hadrian has his own sense of humor, and together they just bounce well off each other, and it is fantastic. So this book series is full of a lot of adventure, is full of a lot of twists and turns, is full of a lot of humor, and a lot of originality. It's just a whole lot of fun, and it's one of those series that you can't help but keep reading. You don't want to put it down. The characters of Royce and Hadrian aren't quite as well fleshed out in the first volume, but you definitely get more into their history and these characters themselves in the next 2 volumes. So I have heard that as a complaint from some people. It didn't bother me that much, but do know that you definitely get to learn a lot more about Royce and Hadrian in the later volumes. In addition to the Riyria Revelations series, he also has the Riyria Chronicles series, which is the prequel series to Royce and Hadrian. So it's kind of Royce and Hadrian's origin story of how they met and how they've made this organization Riyria. And these books consist of The Crown Tower, The Rose and Thorn, and the recently published Death of Duluth, and each one is basically a separately contained novel. The Crown Tower is how Royce and Hadrian meet, and it is an event that is referenced in the Riyria Revelation series and the Theft of Swords books. And the next one takes up with Rose and Thorn, which takes place shortly after the end of Crown Tower, and then Death of Duluth, which takes place about a year or so after the end of the Rose and Thorn. I really, really like the Chronicles novels. It's kind of just fun, self-contained adventure stories. I would recommend reading the Riyria Revelation series first, just because I feel like you get more invested in the characters and the story, and then reading the prequel novels. I find that to be more enjoyable, and I have heard other people who have read the prequel novels first and then this one, and they said that they wish they would have read the original stories first. So I would recommend starting with this one, but you can do either. You can start with the prequel novels and then go into this one. It's basically whatever you prefer. He makes it pretty easy to have a different starting place, so it doesn't really matter which one you start with. You'll still get into the characters and the stories. I find the prequel novels to be a lot of fun, though. They're just fun adventure stories, and I just really, really like them, especially learning more about Royce and Hadrian and how their relationship was at the beginning of the story versus the end of the story. So it's kind of a fun comparison between the two. In addition to the Royce and Hadrian books, Michael J Sullivan has published one sci-fi novel, and it is Hollow World. I have read it, and I did rather enjoy it. I read it a year ago. It basically reminds me of a more modern take on The Time Machine by Orson Welles. It follows this guy who makes a time machine in his garage and he ends up traveling into the future, but things are not quite what they seem, and the people aren't quite what they seem, and soon some threats from his far past, because he's in the future now, come back to kind of threaten him and haunt him. It was really a very interesting story and an interesting take on the time machine, because that's basically how I would describe it as being, and I really enjoyed it. It was definitely fun for a sci-fi novel. I don't read a lot of sci-fi, but I really did enjoy this one, and I think in part because I really like Michael J Sullivan's writing. That's another great thing about Michael J Sullivan, is that his writing makes it really easy to get into. It's just a lot of fun, the way that he structures the dialogues and the adventures themselves. You can't help but feel invested in the story. You get caught up in the adventure of it, and it is fantastic. So really great stories and a really great storyteller. I think Michael J Sullivan is an author that is a perfect starting place for anybody looking to get into fantasy. I think his stories introduce a lot of the typical fantasy tropes but add their own new twist on them, and it kind of is just a really good introduction into the genre of fantasy. I know a lot of people are intimidated by fantasy as a genre because there are so many different types of fantasy, so many different authors, old and new, and just so many more being published today. But I think if you are just wanting to dip your toes into the fantasy pool, I think that Michael J Sullivan would be a perfect starting place for yourself. And even for people who are longtime lovers of fantasy, will really enjoy Michael J Sullivan's works. I am a longtime lover of fantasy, and I read his books in college, I think, about my sophomore year. So I'd already been reading fantasy for about 10 years at that point, and I really liked it. It was just fantastic. He just adds his own little twist to the stories that you hear a lot about in fantasy and makes them new and fun again, and I just really appreciated that about his books. Alright guys, that is it for my Michael J Sullivan author highlights video. I hope this helps you to learn a little bit more about the author and where you should start in reading his books. I will be interested to know if you've read his books and what you thought of them, and I hope you guys will enjoy them if you decide to check them out for yourselves. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, happy reading. Bye!